to this episode of Chakmah, Choter, the 20th part in our series as we continue to explore what the Choter is going to be tasked with accomplishing as we move into the last days. Yahweh has been exceedingly revealing in his second to last prophet, Zechariah, as he has outlined precisely what will transpire prior to his return. This is a statement from Zechariah 8. We concluded our last program on Family Hour last night with it, and we'd like to resume there so that we can continue on in context. Thus says Yahweh of the spiritual envoys, those of you who will be listening in those days to the words from the mouths of the prophets, who, for the benefit of the relationship and to reveal the straightforward path to get the most out of life, in the day the cornerstone was set and the foundation was established for the family house and home of Yahweh, of these spiritual envoys, so that the royal residence and temple would be built. Your hands would be firm, strong, and your influence steadfast, restoring and empowering. I would dare say that if I had seen this passage 10 years ago, if we were covering it even 5 years ago, I might have been reluctant to draw the comparison that is actually necessary to understand it. And that is because God is saying that to those who are listening to the words of the prophets who were there that day that the house for Yahweh was established. Well, there were no prophets when the second temple was built. There is no third. And so this has to be directing our attention to when the cornerstone was set and the foundation was established for the house of the family of Yahweh between the time the 89th Mizmor was revealed by Yahweh to celebrate the achievements of God's Son, the Messiah, the Son of God, our Savior, our returning King. That was in 968 BCE, year 3000. 7 years later, another of Yahweh's prophets would ascend the Temple Mount that Dode had acquired, and he would provide what is the Sermon on the Mount. In that Sermon on the Mount, he would draw particular attention to Anachri, who would convey the message to God's people in the last day. And when one considers the 89th Mizmor, the most adroit retelling of it, the most complete and accurate presentation that has ever been provided of it, is in the Coming Home volumes of Yada Yahowah, as well as part of the Yahowah blog. You will find an entire series devoted to Dode's song in these series of presentations. And the second part of that, which is the Sermon on the Mount, where Solomon introduced the Anachri, to whom his people must listen in the last days and actually do what the Anachri requests of them if they are to live, was not even appreciated by anyone until I translated it some 7 or 8 years ago and began to expound on who that Anachri really is. So in the midst of a series of prophecies that speak to the very last days that play out before God's return, with a statement after statement pertaining to that time. We find God going back in time to say, do you recall, did you listen to the prophecies that were made while the foundation of the house for Yahweh was being built? And if you have, then there's two prophecies you're going to recognize. One is an explanation of the 89th Mizmor and the fact that the 89th Mizmor, the song to Dod, presents Dod as the Son of God, the Messiah, the returning King, and our Savior. When presented correctly, it's the greatest discovery in human history. And it is the Nakri who brought that understanding to you. Just as the next prophecy, the one by Solomon, delivered exactly 7 years later. And, of course, on Towrah, the day of the herald, points to the one who will fulfill Towrah, the day of the herald, exactly 3,000 years minus 7 of that date. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? But that's what's being addressed here. I'll read it to you again so that hopefully you'll pick up on all the nuances that God is sharing and you have a better appreciation for why God brought up what occurred on the day of the herald, and as the cornerstone of Yahweh's home was set, representing Dod through the 89th Mizmor, that you understand why we're here. We're here to reintroduce Yisrael to their Messiah, Son of God, Savior, returning King, Dod, and the one who speaks authoritatively about Yahweh to call God's people home. Thus says Yahweh, Sabah. Those of you who will be listening in those days. Well, those days that he's talking about are the end days. He's talking about on Towrah, after all the Israelites have been brought back home, after the end of the time of Jacob's trouble. So those of you who will be listening at that time, in those days, to the words from the mouths of the prophets. Well, the words of the mouths of the prophets, they're the ones who in the day that the cornerstone was set for the foundation of Yahweh's house and family, this royal residence, the temple. Well, of them there were two. The one through whom Yahweh revealed the 89th Mizmor, and through Solomon, who provided the commencement address at the completion of the temple. And it says, of these individuals, they would then be on solid footing, their influence steadfast, their hand restoring and empowering. Zechariah, memorable man of Yah, 8:9. The most rational way to interpret this is to see it as Yahweh acknowledging that the three aforementioned prophetic accounts pursuant to building his home have not only applied and contributed to the impending family reunion 10 days after the day of the herald, and to all who are gathered to being right with God at this moment, the ones who have realized that they spoke to this purpose and who have pursued the benefit to its natural conclusion are now being appreciated for their contributions. Now, before we recognize Solomon's dedication speech at the moment that the Hekal of Yahweh's Bereth was delivered, let's proceed a little deeper into the 8th chapter of Zechariah, Yah's memorable man. And then I'm going to go back to that passage that Solomon gave, because we have just recovered in previous programs, twice, I think now, maybe even 3 times, because I love it so. 2 Samuel 7, which is about the creation of Yahweh's home and who lives in homes and who is building what for home and what Dod's role is going to be in our future. So having accomplished that, we will now turn to this profound statement momentarily from Chronicles. But digging deeper into the prophetic revelations of Zechariah in the 8th chapter, we find, indeed, it will have been true before the arrival and presence of those days, there was no compensation, no payment for services rendered for this man, and the reward for the beast was for her to no longer exist. And for the one who left and went away, as well as for the one who was brought out, there will be no contentment, no resolution or salvation from the anguishing adversity or tormenting trouble of the adversary. Then I will dispatch and release against all mankind an individual against this shouting and roaring of his countrymen. Zechariah 8:10. However, now it will not be the same as in the former days, for my approach to the remaining remnant of the people prophetically declares Yahweh of the spiritual implements. Now, there's a lot to be gleaned from this statement, which is that God is going to send a man in those days who is not going to be paid for his services. He is going to do them because God has asked him to, and for no other benefit or reward. And that the beast, as a result of what he does, will no longer exist. And for the one who has now left and gone away, and the one who will be brought out, there'll be no contentment, no salvation. We're going to drive away the naysayers, those who have come to harm God's people, those who have denied Dod, Yahweh's name, will be gone. And then God is going to dispatch against all mankind this individual whose job it is to collectively shout against, roar against all of those who would speak on behalf of religion and politics. It is a rather profound insight, I think, and it's one that we really do have to process. At this time, I'd like to pause a moment and reflect on what this means for Israel, because it has God clearly saying that you need to listen, Israel. You need to recognize that for so very long you have been opposed to Yahweh, that you have erased his name, you have denounced his son's achievements, you've replaced his Torah with your Talmud, you have gone after your religion Pursue it. Let it influence your life as opposed to the relationship that Yahweh sought for you. God chose you, but you have not chosen him in a very, very long time. You told God to go away, that you never wanted to hear from him again. And he has accommodated that request and will continue to do so until a significant number of you choose to return, at which point he will return to you. This is the message that Yahweh is offering his people. It is what you now have an opportunity to capitalize upon. And as we sit here now, the big challenge is that there are so few in Israel, even to this moment, who are willing to listen to God. You listen to your rabbis, you have been misled by them for a very long time. They have sold you out. As I shared in the presentation against Christianity this morning, it's the rabbis who have brought all three of the most deadly menaces plaguing Israel today and Jews worldwide. So rabbis who schooled Paul as a rabbi so that he could do what could not have been done had he not been trained as a rabbi. And that is to rip off, misappropriate, misquote statements from the Torah and prophets because he had been trained in them and had the mindset of a rabbi, which is to replace God's words with man's words, to be argumentative towards God, to replace God with man. And because of that training, he was in position to create the myth of Jesus Christ, and he did. And in the next 14 books that comprise the Christian New Testament, Paul wrote them all. He inspired the book of Mark and Luke and Acts. And a myth was born. Dode was counterfeited. Identity theft had been perpetrated. We were now dealing with replacement foolology. And nothing has ever been the same. It's perhaps the greatest crime ever committed, not just by Paul for having perpetrated it and getting billions of people to believe what is an obvious lie, but also the rabbis for allowing it to happen. Not only having trained Paul to do this dastardly deed, but allowing him to lie in this manner when you had such evidence to refute him, to do what I've done, to explain that the 22nd Psalm negates any possibility that Paul was telling the truth, because it's Dode that was crucified, fulfilling Passover. Because Yeshaya 9 declares that Dode is the son who was given to us. Because 2 Samuel 7 reveals that Dode is the one who is returning as king, and that it is his throne forevermore. Because Yirmiyah 31 says that when the covenant is finally restored, it will be renewed and reaffirmed with Yisrael and Yehudim, not with Goyim or Christians. And that the difference between the covenant as it currently exists and as it will exist is that the Torah will literally be written inside of us by God, negating any possibility of a New Testament. In the first 30 Mizmor, Dode says over and over again that he is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah. And Yahweh concurs with him. He explains that he is volunteering to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim. In Daniel 9, we have Dode as Gabriel telling us exactly the day that he is going to arrive to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim in year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. And he did it. In Isaiah 53, when he talks about the lamb bearing the guilt of his people, Yeshaya introduces the presentation telling his people that they need to listen to and come to appreciate, identify the one who explains who the Zeroah are. And that the Zeroah are Moshe, who explained the purpose of Passover, Dod, who is the sacrificial lamb of God who fulfilled Passover, and his Bashar, herald, this Nachri that Solomon would speak of, this one that is being spoken of here in Zechariah 8, who would explain this to God's people. First time ever that the Zeroah has been identified as such. And that's the preamble to understanding Yeshaya 53. And throughout the book of Yeshaya, the prophet is keen on explaining precisely what Dod is going to accomplish. And so it should have been exceedingly easy for the rabbis to identify Dod as the Messiah. They knew the exact day that he was going to arrive to do this. They knew that he was going to be crucified by the Romans because he spoke of being crucified 1,000 years before he endured that fate, 700 years before crucifixion even existed. He explained it all. Every detail. He then told of his fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim again, and the 88th Mizmor song. God even tells us in Zechariah 12 that he's returning with Dod, and he even says that Dod is the one that you pierced, crucified. It is unforgivable that the rabbis failed to acknowledge the hundreds of prophecies regarding Dod. It's unfathomable that when Paul, as a trained rabbi, promoted the myth of Iesu Christou, that the rabbis didn't point out that there's no mention of a Iesu Christou. There's no mention of Christ. There isn't a single reference anywhere in the prophets to such an individual, but there are 1,100 references to Dod. And that Dod was named in every prophecy that was misappropriated to try to justify the myth of Iesu Christou. And then when Paul's letters were first published, starting in 52 CE, not a single rabbi took him to task and said, "You have misquoted everything. Everything you've said here is an inaccurate rendering of what Yahweh actually conveyed. Here's the proof. Here's what Yahweh said. Here's what you cited. They're the opposite of one another." To discredit it, to nip Christianity in the bud so that it wouldn't devastate God's people for the next 1,800 years, creating the environment that so demonized and dehumanized Jews that the Holocaust was possible. And the Holy Roman Empire that had become Europe. It's all the fault of the rabbis, Christianity. And then when the rabbis went on from failing to recognize the hundreds of prophecies regarding Dod fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, so that it wasn't until I revealed it a few years ago that anyone had even considered it. And even now that I have brought it to your attention, there's no rabbis that are coming clean and say, "Yeah, we screwed that one up." You're right. We shouldn't be looking for a nameless Messiah. It's obviously Dod. He was the one who was crucified in 33 CE. We just flat out bungled it. That the rabbis would go on to create the most deadly menace of Israel today, Islam. The initial surahs of the Quran are all plagiarized from Hanif poetry, and that's Arab converts to Judaism in Yemen, wrote the type of rhythmic, rhyming prose that is the basis of the first some 80 surahs chronologically. Judaism was responsible for those. But it becomes even worse when Muhammad moved to Yathrib, a farming community of some 30,000 Jews, many rabbis, about 150 years after the Talmud had been codified. Not very far from Babylon, where it was written. And when Muhammad ran out of material, it was the rabbis who sold Muhammad, making a buck on reciting their Talmud to him. But Muhammad twisted them even further. The stories that they revealed, they're ubiquitous in the Quran. Every presentation of a character that is presented in the Torah and prophets, when cited in the Quran, bears all the earmarks of the Talmud. It's the Talmud's variation of them. Some of these stories are unbelievably inane, and the most inane of them made their way directly into the Quran. An army of talking ants, of Dode having another army of birds that he could sing to and talk to. The story of the Queen of Sheba and her showing ankle and how that caused a conniption fit, all with a hoopy bird as the narrator of the story. It's a rabbinic story. It makes its way into the Quran wholesale. As does the stupidity of the doting accounts. Even the story that's repeated so often in the Quran of Abraham, his childhood, and of him taking an axe to all of the idols of, and they don't even know where he lived, of course, in the Quran, and then leaving the biggest of the idols, and then telling the people that the biggest of the idols took out all the other idols, which is really the story of the Kaaba, where it was a rock pile of 350 gods, and one of the rocks did all the rest of the rocks in and claimed to be the sole monotheistic God of the world after having shattered all of the other rocks that were rock gods there. And that whole story is Talmudic. And of course, it's senseless because the Babylonians actually didn't have idols of such ilk. They didn't manufacture them in human form. The whole thing is just nothing but a lie. It has no historic authenticity. It's just a Talmud story that the rabbi sold to Muhammad so he could create a sense of religiosity to the Quran, which otherwise would be nothing but a series of lame arguments and a terrorist manifesto, a commitment to annihilate all humankind. It wouldn't be any more religious than what Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan had said and done. But when the rabbis began to mock Muhammad when he claimed that it was Allah that revealed those stories when they had in fact recited and sold them to him, Muhammad responded like a psychopath. And he didn't just threaten to kill Jews, he slaughtered them. And the Quran turns exceedingly anti-Semitic because psychopaths always justify their acts of mass murder. That's why Islam targets Jews to this day. It's why 10/7 happened. Had rabbis not sold Muhammad Talmud stories, there would have been no 1948 War of Independence, no 1967 Six-Day War, no 1973 Yom Kippur War, no ongoing intifadas against Muslims, no Islamic terrorism, no 10/7. And had rabbis not trained Paul to create the myth of Jesus Christ and blame Jews for killing the imaginary God, there'd have been no Holocaust. Had rabbis not created Judaism on the myth of the false Messiah, Bar Kokhba, and invited Hadrian to perpetrate a final solution on the Roman Jewish problem as a result of this uprising based on the false Messiah, son of a star, Bar Kokhba, there'd have been no diaspora. The land would not have been renamed Philistia. There would be no myth of the Palestinians. No Palestinian people, no threat of a Palestinian state, no diaspora, no living in shuttles for 1,800 years, no serving as slaves in Europe, no being taken away from the land, no Holocaust. Rabbis brought all three of these horrendous events on God's people. They did this to you. They created Christianity. They created Judaism. They created Islam. And this is the consequence of all three of those religions. To make a buck, to control, to be in positions of power, they sold your soul to the devil. And yet you cling to them. You still listen to them. When I post on X or Facebook and say, you need to stop this. If you're going to survive, you need to walk away from, completely disassociate from, actually go to the point of exposing and condemning the malfeasance of the rabbis. You know that the Haredim are a parasite. You know that they don't speak for God. You know that they're wrong. You know they're lame. You even know that they wouldn't do any good if they were put into the IDF because they have no capacity to think. They have no capacity to do anything worthwhile. They're useless, counterproductive. You know it. But you just can't go that next step. You can't accept the realization that Yahweh's name is key to knowing him. And you believe the rabbinic tripe that you have to refer to him as Hashem or G-D. Why in the hell would you call him G-D? I mean, are you familiar with the son of Jacob named God? Don't you know it's spelled exactly the same way? You want to write G-D for the tribe? Don't you know that God uses El and Elohim to present both himself as God and also to besmirch false gods? He didn't have any problem saying it, did he? Do you know that God calls out by name Baal, the Lord, and condemns him? And Asherah, the queen of heaven, the mother of God, he didn't have a problem saying the names of false gods, did he? And so you've misinterpreted what God said. The names of false gods should not be promoted on your lips as if they were true. But there's nothing wrong with condemning them, as I condemn the notion of Allah and Jesus. You know, and then after Rabbi Akiba is solely responsible for the myth of Palestine that is haunting Jews today because of his false Messiah, Bar Kokhba, you don't even have the presence of mind to say, you know, we ought to stop saying that word. We ought to recognize that Palestine exists for a single reason, just as it existed then to create the myth that there was no Judea. He said it to mock Jews, to annihilate any revival amongst Jews, any longing for their land. The same reason that Yasser Arafat revised the term in 1968. The word is created solely for the purpose of annihilating Jews, obliterating Israel. And yet you say it, your politicians say it, your media spokesperson say it. To a person in Israel, you use it. It's like you're paying for your own funeral. That brings me to one other thing that I want to talk to you about today, and that is the realization that there are two groups now, two voices, maybe three in Israel that are all wrong. You have the progressives who want to do any kind of a deal with the Muslims to return the final 20 living hostages. They would capitulate to the devil. They don't care what the future would bring. They don't even understand today how they're going to understand tomorrow. They have no idea that trading for and capitulating to Islam for 20 living people will cost $2 million going forward. Now, they can't even do the math as to why that's wrong. Mainly because they hate the government. They hate the elected government of Israel more than they hate Islam that perpetrated 10/7. It's holding those hostages. Then you have the Haredim who are looking for nothing but handouts. They want to be parasites. They have no interest in making any contribution to Israel. And they vote as a unified bloc because the rabbis control their lives. Tell them what they can read, what they can think, what they can do, who they vote for. And they have a bloc for the sole purpose of maintaining their parasitic lifestyle, destroying Israel from within. And then you have a very large number of Israelis, the majority of Israelis, who are right-wing politically, patriotic, Zionists, want to occupy all of Israel. Listen, I'm patriotic for Israel too. It's the only country in the world I'm patriotic for. And I want Israelites to live in all of Israel as well. And I want Israel to hold the Muslims accountable who perpetrated and accommodated and celebrated 10/7. But it's that group that is constantly promoting this idea that Israel is right in eliminating Hamas, and that Hamas can be finished, and that Netanyahu's war goals are achievable. It's insane. And I'm not telling you this because it's obvious now, even though you don't seem to get it. I'm telling you this because I wrote about it on 10/7/23, saying that this is what I think you're going to do, and this is what's going to happen as a result. You're going to turn the world against you while you actually manufacture more jihadists than you kill. But now it's obvious. And yet, more tanks are being lined up, more troops are marching, and Israel has made the announcement that it's going to go back in and conquer Gaza and occupy Gaza. You know the lives that will be squandered trying to occupy that hellhole of Islamic rage? For what? I mean, the only thing you can do at this point that is sane about Gaza is keep it constrained. Tell the rest of the world you can do whatever you damn well want with the Gazans. You can feed them if you want to. It's out of our control. We do not care what you do with it. You want to rebuild Gaza? That's up to you. We don't care. We can't reform them. We're not going to pretend that they can be reformed. We're certainly not going to pretend that the Palestinian Authority is a moderate organization and that they have any influence in Gaza or they could ever stay in power in Gaza. We know that not to be true. The only thing you can do at this point is to say we're going to have a buffer zone between Egypt and Gaza so they don't get more weapons. We're going to patrol the coast so that no weapons come that way. And we're going to have a buffer zone around Gaza and build the biggest, damn, ugliest, nastiest, tallest wall in the history of walls. And we're going to bring substantial numbers of troops and base them around the border with Gaza so that they never come back through that way. And otherwise quarantine the place. Let the world bring in whatever food it wants to. If it's going to come in through the United States, so be it. But don't occupy it. And for God's sake, don't move the Gazas into the Sinai or into Jordan, where they have unlimited access to weapons. That would be a horrendous mistake. And don't continue to equip the IDF so that it can fight a war that will never be waged, which is an all-Islamic national war with airplanes and tanks and all that sort of thing. It's not going to happen. 10-7 proved that that is not the next war. The next one will be 100 to 1,000 times worse than 10-7 was. It's going to be a jihadi invasion again, which the IDF is ill-equipped to deal with, as they have proven. But you can't go back into Gaza and expect a different result. You can't wipe out Hamas. Not because Hamas is all that hot, because Hamas is Islamic. 100% of the Gazans are Muslims. You're not going to take the Islam out of the Gazan. And so long as 100% of Gazans are Muslims, Hamas by any other name, by the Hamas name, by Islamic Jihad, by the Palestinian Authority, by the Muslim Brotherhood, by Hezbollah, doesn't matter the name. It will metastasize to other jihadists, more jihadists now in Gaza than there were when the war started. You can't fight a religious enemy with bullets and bombs. You manufacture more of them with everyone you kill. And all along, as I've tried to emphasize to everyone who is patriotic on behalf of Israel, the blowing up more and more buildings in Gaza isn't helpful. It's destroying your reputation in the world. Anti-Semitism was already pervasive. You have 1 billion Muslims acting as pimps for Islam, wanting to perpetrate genocide on Jews, and 2 billion Muslims, and probably 1 billion of the most Orthodox Christians that have, that basic mentality that's been portrayed by the Roman Catholic Church against Israel. And I look at the influence of places like Ireland and Spain that are so influenced by Roman Catholicism and how they're so anti-Israel. France, so anti-Israel. All of these nations clamoring now for a fake Justinian state of terror. So with every building you blow up, you make that more inevitable. You're not protecting yourself, you're committing suicide. And then you have this issue of having 60 some odd % of Jews in favor of normalization with Saudi Arabia, and that those who believe that Trump is on their side. And yet there is no normalization with Saudi Arabia ever. And even the attempt of it will force a fake Justinian state, a Palestinian state that could be cut right into the heart of Israel. Now the jihadists that would only have attacked from the outside of Israel will be attacking from the inside as well. No way to police the arms, no way to control them. Oh, you'll get promises of Israel's security. What is that going to mean? Progressive politicians have never had an affinity for truth. And Muslims don't know what it means. One for lies that have nothing to say. And Donald Trump is now owned and operated by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, MBS. He took $16 billion worth of bribes. His payment is the heart of Israel on a silver platter. It's coming. It's inevitable. Will happen within a year's time. It's a terrible spot that you find yourself in, but unfortunately you put yourself in this position, Israel. The rabbis did a lot of the damage to you, and then politically you did the rest. And so the purpose of all of these prophets is to warn you about this, to get a meaningful number of you to recognize how wrong this has been. That your reliance on politics and religion has separated you from God, that he has nothing to do with you currently and will not return to engage with you until such time as you return to him. That's my job. That's why we're here. That's what we'd like to accomplish with you, and I'm doing these programs so that there are Jews who embrace the truth, who begin to share it with all who will listen, and that collectively we create a chorus all devoted to what Yahweh revealed through his prophets, and that we minimize the carnage. Because as bad as things are now, the prophets made it quite clear, you're about to enter the time of Jacob's troubles. The prophets say that it's going to be worse than any time in Israel's past, worse than the Holocaust. And it lasts 7 years, at which time Dod is returning, your Messiah. You don't even know him. You don't recognize him. You don't credit him for anything he achieved. You don't even apply the titles that he deserves. And he's coming back with Yahweh, the God whose name you've erased. You don't even mention that he's returning with the Messiah. And Messiah isn't even one of the most important titles attributed to Dod. It's a very minor title associated with him. It basically means he was anointed for service. His most important title, Bakor, firstborn son of God. King, not only of Israel, but of the universe going forward. Chosen one. Zeroah, sacrificial lamb. Shemak, branch from the tree of life. Everything grows. Ra'ah, shepherd for his people. The one who is set apart, unique, special. Prophet. Dod is all of these things and more. And yet you don't credit him with much of any of it. And even when you pretend that you're draping yourself in the Star of David, it's not David's star. Not even David's, not even his name. His name is Dod. It means beloved. You'll find it in your name. Yahud means Yahweh and Dod. Therefore, Yahweh's beloved. And Dod didn't have a star. It's Bar Kokhba that had the star. It's the damn false Messiah whose star you're parading around under. The very star that was used to harass you by the Roman Catholic Church and by the Nazis. You know, and when you think of religion and the Nazis, which so many Jews don't recognize, is that you want to blame the Nazis for the Holocaust. Wasn't a Nazi idea. Nazi execution, but not inspiration. The inspiration for the Holocaust came from the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who met with Hitler late in 1941 and convinced Hitler that exiling Jews was a bad idea, that exterminating them was the better choice. And it was immediately after that that the high brass of the Nazi party met to plan the execution of Jews in the final solution. It's Islam again. You don't recognize that 10/7 was a repeat of what happened at Kabar in Arabia when Muhammad, after he had signed the Treaty of Hudabayah, where he announced, I'm not really Allah's prophet. There really is no Allah. And that I won't terrorize or plunder my people for 10 years. And, of course, he didn't honor that at all the next year with the Quran saying that no treaty between a Muslim and non-Muslim is binding on the Muslim, which tells you it's pretty stupid to form a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, since they will demand a Fakistanian state. And they will make all promises regarding that state, none of which they'll honor. That the first Muslims were bloodthirsty. They went to Mecca to conquer it, to plunder it, to rape the women, to pilfer it. Islam was a blood sport. And when Muhammad capitulated because he got cold feet, because the last time his religious horde was exposed to those who knew him best, and those around the Kaaba knew him and hated him and mocked him, he was reduced to 5 followers. So Muhammad got cold feet. He didn't have sufficient men under arms, and so he satiated the bloodlust of the first Muslims at Kabar. It's where the phrase Allahu Akbar was first uttered. It means Allah is greater than Yahowah. And he plundered the farming community, committed acts of torture, raped the women, Muhammad himself participating in the rapes, sold the children into slavery, lots of abductions, wholesale mass murder. Really is no difference between the Kabar terrorist raid that Muhammad led after Hudabayah and what happened in Israel with the kibbutzim and the farming communities on 10/7. And yet your government, your newspapers, your religious leaders, none of them held Islam accountable. You all pretended like Hamas was the sole perpetrator. I mean, 2/3 of those who invaded Israel weren't even affiliated with Hamas. They were just regular Muslims, and you couldn't figure it out. You lashed out at Hamas, lashing out at a symptom. Well, the cause of the problem went unannounced. This is the position you've put yourself in, and it's why I'm drawing your attention to the letter I wrote to Israel on 10/7/23, telling you that if you do this, it's going to turn out very badly for you. And now that you even know that it has failed as a plan and you're doubling down on that plan, you just have to say that it's insane. The smartest people in the world are acting like idiots. You're committing suicide. I've shared many times what the proper approach is to surviving amongst 2 billion Muslims and a billion progressives that want to annihilate Israel. And that is what their protests on behalf of Palestine mean. That's all they mean, is we're here to annihilate Israel. Demonize them, dehumanize them, annihilate them. 3 billion people. And they now have the support of at least 1 billion Christians and probably 1 billion conspirators. The breadth and depth of anti-Semitism around the world now is 100 times worse than it was in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s Europe. You know that to be true. And I want you to survive it, but you can't survive it unless you know that your enemy is Islam. That's why I wrote Goddamn Religion. The 5 volumes, goddamnreligion.org, are free for you. Please read them. Free in their entirety. 4,250 pages of documented proof that Islam is a death cult, that it is a order to annihilate all humankind, starting with Jews. You need to know the truth and respond intelligently based upon that. You need to tear down the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque that inspired such carnage against you. You need to realize that trying to save the hostages as your primary goal is suicide. It is why they abducted them. And if you reward them for abducting them by trading for them, all you're going to do is encourage more of what has happened. And the next time it's going to be 1,000-fold worse. You must stop using the term Palestinian unless it is to denounce it. Tell your history. Demonstrate and prove emphatically that the myth of Palestine exists for a single purpose, which is to perpetrate genocide against Jews. Start telling the history of Islam's first 100 years. Talk about the genocide of Jews in Arabia by Muhammad, the fact he led 75 terrorist raids, that he was a rapist, he was a pedophile, he was a mass murderer, that he plagiarized the Talmud to create the Quran. Tell the truth. Expose the fact that Muhammad was never in Jerusalem. The wild-assed winged donkey ride was a flight of fancy. Expose the myth that created Alaska and the Dome of the Rock, and then destroy those buildings. Islam is exceedingly easy to refute. Read Goddamn Religion. All 5 volumes are free at goddamnreligion.org. Read them if you want to survive. I would also encourage you to read the 5 volumes of Twistianity so that you can clear away the rubbish of the religion that has dehumanized you and devalued you such that this upwelling of anti-Semitism has become so popular around the world. You need to know the truth. You need to fight back. But that begins by never using the term Palestinian again, unless it is to denounce this genocide against Jews. You also need to express the fact that in Islam, in that first 100 years after perpetrating genocide against Jews and then forcing Islam on every Arab, that the Muslims out of Arabia were savages, and they plundered, raped, terrorized, and murdered 200 million people, 1/3 of the Earth's population, in their raids, which left a river of blood from Morocco all the way into India. 200 million people raped, plundered, enslaved, and murdered. And so when Israel is accused of colonialization and occupation, even though it's the land of Israel, of Jews, it is the Muslims who have actually done this very thing, and more egregiously than any people in human history. Tell the story. I begged Israel on 10/7 to tell the story of every Jewish life lost, of showing the unedited video everywhere, anywhere, all the time, of all of the atrocities that were committed on that day, all of them, and tell the whole story of all of the people whose lives were lost so that we know the precious souls, we know their families, we know what they would have offered the world. Tell that story, and you didn't do it. And even by the time you started to release some of the video, you didn't even release the worst of it. And you might say, well, we didn't want to tarnish the memory of those people. They're dead. Make their lives matter by exposing those who killed them, who slaughtered them, who mutilated them, who tortured them. Was an essential aspect of the media war that Israel lost. And then it's exactly what the Muslims wanted. They wanted the carnage that Israel perpetrated in Gaza, knowing that it would occur, so that they could paint the Jews as the real villains. And it played right into their hands, committing suicide. Of course, The biggest issue of all is that Israel, you have to start denouncing your politicians and your religious leaders. They have misled you. They have been counterproductive to you. They do not deserve your trust. The IDF failed miserably. Shin Bet failed miserably. Mossad failed miserably. This government failed miserably. Everyone failed you. They all have to resign, and you have to stop trusting them. Of course, to survive, you can't be a house divided. You can't have 20% of the progressives in Israel trying to bring down the government and 20% of the Haredim being parasites of the government. That's not going to work. And across the world, in America and Europe, the most shrill of the progressive voices calling for the demise of Israel are Jews. You are very much a house divided. And you have been a house divided for 3,400 years. Even during the Exodus, Moshe couldn't stand you. Moshe gave up. He told God, you might as well just kill me. These people are impossible. The Exodus was not a joyous experience. It was horrendous. Jews didn't listen to God. They're not listening now. And more than anything, that's what needs to change. You need to silence the voice of Judaism. Diminish the voice of politics. And listen to the voice of Yahowah. It is why there are 25 of the 35 books on the shelf at YadaYah.com, all free for you, that are based on amplified translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls, cleansed of the diacritical markings. The truth brought to you as you've never seen it before, with thousands upon thousands of profound insights that will take you back to God, save you from all of this carnage, lead you back home, bring peace, genuine, lasting peace. So this has been a unique episode of the YAHOWAH blog. I know it's a message that's difficult for you to hear. But Israel, those of you who continue to turn a deaf ear to this, I'm sorry to say you're going to die. The next 7 years is going to be horrific beyond your imagination. And there's only one solution. It's YAHOWAH. Thank you for listening to this, the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn.